The big Prince Charming who flaunts his etiquette among people has been exposed by one of his past maids, and now the entire world knows about him as a stinky, privileged son of the crown. Watch this video until the end to understand what and why Prince Andrew's past Maid exposed his real personality. Now it makes sense. There was no bad person made out of him. He was evil throughout. Charlotte Briggs was a woman who had an aspiration to serve the royal family, and she used to believe that if one gives love to a person, they would always remain good. But this time, she was mistaken. What Charlotte didn't understand was that sometimes situations are so poisonous that regardless of how much you lovingly care for a snake egg, it will only produce a snake, and that is what occurred in Prince Andrew's life. She had only been 21 when she became part of Prince Andrew's universe, an universe which held out the excitement of palace corridors and the cachet of royal service, but which instead resulted in her defining her role as the one that no one wanted. The reason was straightforward. Behind the gleaming walls of Buckingham Palace resided a man who was not the suave Duke of York the public once believed, but rather someone whom his own aides freely labeled as arrogant, rude, and insane. In one of her Daily Mail interviews, she did not hesitate. She said everything she felt about Andrew. "I don't give a toss what Prince Andrew feels. He is a terrible, nasty man." It was not the tone of someone trying to mollify her. It was the most uncensored testimony of someone who had survived years of humiliating abuse. And as her tales gained circulation, the world at last received an unfiltered look at how Andrew actually behaved when the cameras weren't rolling. Her first recollections of the Duke were of him as indolent, spoiled, and hot-tempered. In her version, Andrew frequently barked instructions on jobs that he could have done himself. Curtains were among his manias. Heavy floor-to-ceiling drapery, which could be easily drawn by his own hand, was left to Briggs. The moment she created the slightest opening between them, the error, if it could even be described as such, triggered a tantrum. Andrew stormed out of his office, bellowing down the corridor, his voice ringing with cursing. "Can't you bloody do anything right?" he shrieked as he sent the young Maid weeping. It was a peek at the power system under which the staff lived every day. In Andrew's home, errors were not accepted, no matter how small, and each action was weighed with punishment. Briggs remembered navigating through rooms with a lingering fear of being seen. "I did everything I could to stay out of his sight," she confessed. His moods were unpredictable, his temper worse. But it wasn't just his temper that unsettled her. It was his eccentric demands, one so obsessive and degrading they were on the edge of the ridiculous. The most notorious involved his stuffed animal collection. To anyone else, it was a sweet little tick, a man in his 30s holding on to youth. But to those responsible for its upkeep, it was hell. The Duke of York retained 72 teddy bears alongside a stuffed Black Panther and hippo and insisted on having them positioned with military accuracy. Nobody moved them without instruction. Laminated instructions explained where each toy was to go, including which was to be at the back, which in front, and where his two preferred bears were to sit, always by his bedside like guard dogs. Briggs recounted having to spend a whole day being instructed on this ritual by himself, and a slip would set off one of Andrew's legendary tantrums. His own bedroom looked like a shrine to his own vulnerability. The royal crest embroidered pillows needed to be centered exactly after the mattress had been turned. His pajamas were to be arranged symmetrically, and the stuffed animals, once they had been showcased, were to be taken away before bedtime, then replaced at sunrise. Staff, including Briggs, frequently speculated about the kind of man who required this treatment and what it said about him. The media wasn't slow to pick this up. It went on to trade on these stories, portraying a mature prince locked in arrested development, relying on young maids to calm his bad temper and defend the integrity of his teddy bears. For Briggs, though, it wasn't amusing. It was like tiptoeing around on eggshells each day, she said. The vision of a monarch who sobbed like a child over bears and curtains was brutally juxtaposed to the charm he tried to project publicly. Worse still were his dealings with the other servants. Briggs labeled him as a man who treated palace staff as rubbish. No thanks and no courtesy, as opposed to Charles, Edward, and even Prince Philip, who she recalled were respectful and gentlemanlike. Andrew was in a league of cruelty all by himself. It wasn't like she was concocting these tales out of her hair. Other former staff disclosed similar things. One former maid remembered having to hurry across the room to shut curtains that Andrew himself was standing literally next to, just to be reminded of her place. Another recounted his coldness and condescension in the smallest interactions. But the thing that made these admissions cut so deeply was how they were unnecessary. Andrew wasn't weighed down by his siblings' responsibilities. He wasn't a prince. His job was ceremonial at best, decadent at worst, but nevertheless he insisted on adoration from those around him. The truth Charlotte Briggs uncovered was not merely about a hot-headed man or childish ways, but a pattern, a man who enjoyed belittling others, who interpreted service as not help but surrender, who made the palace environment so poisonous that service, even in the palace, became intolerable. This was only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, no, this was not the tip of the iceberg. There was something about Andrew that even Charlotte recognized, and it began at a very early age. From the outset, Andrew's personality differed from his siblings, and not in a complimentary way. Where Charles was reserved and studious, and was obstinate but competent, Andrew had something much less innocent about him. Even as a baby, palace officials and royal observers commented on a streak of cruelty running through his games. He wasn't only hungry for attention, he required it, and he regularly derived it by taunting and tormenting people who were powerless to retaliate. Baiting the stone-faced Queen's guards was one of his first pleasures. At an age when most boys would recoil from their stern presence, Andrew pranced past them, jeering at their stiff stance, making faces to crack their demeanor. When they did not respond, he became more infuriated, increasing his pranks to compel them into recognition. This was not innocuous naughtiness. It was a child who thought no rules governed him, even the unspoken rule of the men guarding his kin. But even worse was the cruelty displayed when he was not opposed to human beings. Animals suffered also at the hands of his bratty temper. Witness accounts at the time have him kicking family dogs, laughing at their yelps, and hitting horses' legs with sticks for kicks. The conduct so appalled the royal grooms that one day they decided to take things into their own hands. Taking hold of the young prince, they pushed him headfirst into a horseshit pile and covered him with fresh manure, burying him in the muck he had so thoroughly enjoyed dishing out to others. A gruesome punishment, but one they obviously felt he deserved. And that wasn't the first time staff disobeyed royal protocol to chastise him. Another time, his constant teasing of a palace servant incited the man to fight back. He punched the boy so hard that he gave him a black eye. When the footman tendered his resignation, anticipating being fired on the spot, the Queen would not accept it. Even she seemed to know that Andrew's conduct had ventured so far into heartlessness that punishment was warranted, even if it were from one of her own servants. His meanness was not limited to servants or beasts. With his younger brother Edward, Andrew made every encounter a game. He bullied him in public, taking away cakes, pushing him around, and leaving him bruised. It was not playful brotherhood. It was bullying. To those who watched, it showed a boy drunk with the drug of superiority, always having to prove that he was master. At school, his reputation preceded him like a stench. At prep and then at Gordontown, classmates called him Baby Grumpling for his tantrums and the Snigger for his vicious laughter at someone else's expense. He was not the charming royal that some had wished for. He was the spoiled brat, smug, and always sneering. Even when he grew up, his attitude never changed. It merely became crueler. There were tales of him pulling at the zippers and dresses of female palace staff at events, pushing their faces into dishes with a scornful insistence to smell the partate. The kind of thing a bully would do, not a prince. When on camping excursions, he was reported to sabotage other people's shelters, ripping down fly sheets and throwing them into rivers, so his friends were left wet and miserable. To Andrew, it was simply a prank. To the rest who endured it, it was humiliation. Those who worked under him best described him. He did not talk in the polite formality befitting a child of a royal family. Instead, he hurled objects to the floor and barked commands sprinkled with curses, yelling, "Pick that up." To servants who were used to discipline, to restraint, to dignity, the boy's words were appalling. They perceived in him not a troublesome child, but a spoiled tyrant in miniature form. By the time Andrew was old enough to wear a uniform, his reputation was already established behind palace walls. He wasn't the handsome heir like Charles, nor the tough-edged but effective Anne. He was the one staff feared across, the intolerable child, a boy whose sense of fun was cruelty, whose sense of respect was domination, and whose arrogance seemed to intensify the older he got. How they hoped he would grow out of it. But alas, things continued to deteriorate. By the late 1990s, Andrew's public facade was already beginning to slip. The scandals were no longer merely rumors of temper. They were about money, women, and an arrogance that could no longer be hidden. While his brother Charles was faking overhauling himself following Diana's death, Andrew was descending ever deeper into the behaviors that would forever taint him. One of the first cracks was through his financial connections. His extravagant lifestyle, supported by the privileges of royal office, merged with his careless business dealings. News of him making deals with shady characters, usually men who were being investigated overseas, appeared. The royals quietly swept most of these away, but rumors of cash for access schemes trailed him wherever he went. What started as gestures of favor to friends soon escalated into claims of Andrew cashing in on his royal status, fixing up businessmen with meetings for money. The palace said it wasn't so, but the paper trail kept reappearing. With the money came his fixation on young women. After he divorced Sarah Ferguson, Andrew appeared not to be able to shed the perception of a middle-aged man pursuing women half his age. He boasted about relationships with socialites and models, some not yet into their 20s and in their thousands. His driver used to tell him that he would see nearly 10 women come and go from his house in Bangkok. It was not only humiliating for the family, but it was also disturbing. Reporters openly referred to him as Randy Andy, a nickname which persisted for decades, bringing the Queen's son down to a tabloid punchline. Even inside the palace, aides murmured about his failure to distance himself from disreputable associates. Then came his notorious friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Well before Epstein's arrest, Andrew was seen at his New York mansions, his Caribbean compound, and on his private plane. Photos of Andrew strolling with Epstein after his initial prison term raise questions that he has never managed to dispel. The issue wasn't only the tie, it was his brazenness. While powerful men elsewhere retreated, Andrew stood firm, referring to Epstein as a loyal friend and stating he had no regrets about his friendship with him. That one move would destroy him down the line. But Epstein wasn't the sole shadow over his head. Behind palace walls, staff members were drawing up their own personal list of complaints. Maid staff complained that they were treated like medieval court servants, not modern household employees. One maid recounted how Andrew bullied her into rushing up 7 flights of stairs just to close curtains inches from where Andrew was standing. The maid stated that the abuse was constant, verbal, humiliating.